Stanislav Grof began his career in psychotherapy at the end of the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia. Do not adjust your computer screen. Yes, he looks like a much younger man, a testament to living his truth. In his work, exploring altered states of consciousness, he came to see how ludicrous the traditional medical understanding of these non-ordinary states of consciousness were. For example, in today's lexicon of pathology, Buddha would be labeled schizophrenic, or at least borderline, and St. John of the Cross a hereditary degenerative. His journey into expanded awareness began as a medical student volunteering for a new drug called LSD.
But at your beginning, which is your background was in psychoanalysis, Freudian psychoanalysis. And what were you finding that was lacking that threw you onto this incredible path?
Well, I went to medicine, with the explicit goal to become a psychoanalyst. My original plan was really to work in animated movies, and when I was finishing what in the States would be high school, I had an interview and I was supposed to start working in the film studios in Prague. And just at that time, a friend of mine came and handed me a book, which was Freud's Introductory Lectures to Psychoanalysis. And, I didn't know very much about Freud. You have to imagine this was after the 6 years of the Nazi occupation, where everything that was related to psychoanalysis was burned.
And this was in Czechoslovakia?
Yeah. So all these books were burned in the streets, and then 3 years after the war, the libraries were trying to get the books back. And then the communists came and Freud was again on the index. You had to be a Marxist writing a critique of Freud to get access to Freudian books. All I knew about Freud was what they told us in classes of philosophy, which was that he was a pansexualist. He was trying to explain everything, from symbolism of dreams through symptoms of neurosis to religion and art, from repressed sexuality. So I was kind of marginally interested to start with, and I started reading the book, and I got myself into this really kind of feverish state. I got so excited by Freud's logic. I couldn't go to sleep. I read through the night, and within 2 days I decided I would let the animated movies go and go to study medicine to become a psychoanalyst.
Where did you start running into your first roadblocks once you gained this knowledge and practice? Once you got through school and you started practicing, where did you start seeing your first limitations or roadblocks?
Well, the problem was initially for me was the conflict between the theory of psychoanalysis, which seemed to explain everything. My analyst used to say, there's nothing that in the psyche that psychoanalysis cannot explain. There are only things that it has not explained yet, because they were not the right persons giving the free associations. And I had difficulties understanding how a system that seems to be able to explain everything cannot offer more effective therapeutic techniques. I realized there were very narrow sort of criteria for indications. You had to meet very special criteria to be considered a good candidate. And even if you were considered a good candidate, you had to commit yourself an enormous amount of time. My analysis was 3 times a week, 7 years.
Has to be a faster way.
So I had great difficulties because I had to study medicine to become a Freudian analyst. You have to have a medical background in Europe. And if you study medicine, you find out that if you really understand the problem, you should be able to do something pretty dramatic about it. Or if you cannot, you can understand your failures. Like with cancer or with AIDS, we have a pretty good idea as to where the problem is, what would have to change for us, why we are ineffective. Whereas here, suddenly there was like a full understanding of a problem, and you can do so little over such a long period of time. So it just didn't make any sense to me.
And hopscotching forward just a little bit, this, and not that much forward, entered the subject of backing into, in essence, psychedelic drugs and using this for clinical research among medical faculty. Can you explain how psychedelic drugs entered this whole arena in your life?
See, to me, this was initially completely unrelated to my interest in psychoanalysis. I was working at the psychiatric department of the School of Medicine in Prague, and we were just finishing a large study of Malarial, one of the early tranquilizers, and that came from Sandoz pharmaceutical companies. So they were sending us samples of various substances that they produced, and as part of this, they sent us a sample, big sample of LSD, asking us would we like to work with it and let them know if there was any legitimate use for it. And they suggested in their letter 2 uses. One was maybe the substance could be used as a model psychosis. There seemed to be some similarities between the experiences of people on LSD and the symptoms of naturally occurring psychosis. So this would be a model. You could give it to so-called normal people, do all kinds of testing before, during, and after, and get some insight as to what's happening biologically, biochemically, physiologically in the body of people at the time when they have these very unusual experiences.
So this was their idea of how it might be properly utilized.
Yes.
What actually ended up happening with it? And how did this affect your life?
Well, there was a second little note which was there, which really became, a critical element in my life, where they said maybe this could be used as a kind of unconventional training tool. I mean, psychiatrists, psychologists, nurses, students could spend a few hours in the world of their patients.
So in other words, if the
for learning
practitioners
purposes.
and the medical community took the LSD and started experiencing it, they would be able to relate to their patients better, right?
Yes, understand them better, be able to treat them more effectively.
Now, did you end up being one of the people that it
Yes,
took
so
it
I
to?
became one of the early volunteers, and I had an experience that changed my life, professionally as well as personally.
What happened?
Well, this was actually a situation where I had to agree, besides doing the LSD, to have the EEG taken before, during, and after, and also do something that was called driving the brain waves, which was basically, in my case, exposure to powerful stroboscopic light. And when the light came on, at the time when I was peaking on this, on LSD, I saw this light of incredible intensity. I lost the connection with my body. I lost the connection with Prague, with the planet. And I had a sense that my consciousness just became all there was. Powerful, powerful cosmic, mystical experience. And I came down from that experience with a sense that, that's by far the most interesting thing that you can do when you're a psychiatrist. And so for about 50 years since that time, I have really professionally done very little except things that in one way or another were related to these states. It became my passion.
So, in that 50 years, your discovery, can you explain what your discovery has been in terms of the understanding of and also the value of having had these mystical experiences, whether they're induced by a psychedelic drug or whether they're induced by a shamanistic practice or meditation? What is this that we're now bumping up against at this point in our human evolution?
Well, we have, in traditional psychiatry, psychology, we have the idea that these experiences are what's called altered states of consciousness, which means inauthentic, sort of distorted, due to some kind of toxic influences. These are experiences produced by the brain under certain abnormal circumstances, and they have no relevance. They're not healing, they're not transformative, they're not evolutionary.
They're just abnormalities. And
abnormalities.
Maybe you're even labeled psychotic if you have these.
Definitely. I mean, any non-ordinary state, with the exception of a dream which is not, I would have to say, which is not associated with anxiety, and it doesn't repeat too frequently, because then even dream is seen as pathological. But you can have the ordinary variety, without getting a diagnosis. But any other non-ordinary state of consciousness would be seen as pathological.
So it's a diagnosis then?
So there's no distinction between a mystical or spiritual experience on the one hand and a psychotic experience, meaning a symptom of mental disease, serious mental disease.
So after your experience, this must have caused you some trouble to realize that that is the commonly held notion about all experiences. They're all
yes,
in
there
the
was
same
no,
basket
you know,
of being a net case, so to speak.
Yeah, working with these experiences, you know, for a number of years, it became absolutely obvious to me that these are, if anything, those are supernormal experiences that are not altered states, they are not distortions of what the world is like or what we are like, but that they kind of show us certain additional dimensions of us as human beings and additional dimensions of reality which are not available in the ordinary state of consciousness. So they're complementary. You know, mystics, when they have a mystical experience, they don't have the sense that they experience some kind of distortion of how things are. On the contrary, they experience a sense that now they really have some profound understanding of what existence is about. They get a peace which they were missing up to that point. So the everyday and the non-ordinary of what I call holotropic, which is a certain important subcategory of non-ordinary experiences, that those are complementary. Each of them gives you perspective on a different sector or aspect of reality.
So very simply, in your mind now, before we go to ways of being able to help facilitate these other states of consciousness, talk therapy, what's it good for, really, when you get down to it? What's talk therapy do?
Talk therapy, the way I see it now, is still good, for example, when you work with couples, when you need somebody who's a little more objective, who sort of gives each of those partners feedback as to you know, the different loops that people get caught in, or family therapy where you're dealing with the whole system.
Almost like a mediator.
But even in that case, I would today use some kind of deep experiential work individually with the partners, and then you can use verbal therapy when you're working specifically on the distortion of the interaction between them. But the idea of, you know, working through, let's say, some serious problems, like the idea that you could work through asthma, you know, just talking about it is just not very realistic.
Great. So let's use asthma then as an example of how one, in your mind now, through your experience and what you've developed, how would you work through something like asthma? How many layers might be underneath that condition?
What we do, you know, we cannot use psychedelics now. I don't have the legal framework, but we work with the holotropic breath work.
Talk about that a little bit, about the breath.
Yes, that's you work basically in such a way that you are in a reclining position on a mattress with eye shades or with your eyes closed. There's a certain kind of introduction which involves relaxation of the body, bringing yourself into the present moment. And then at a certain point you start breathing a little faster, deeper than usual, tying the inhalation and the exhalation into a kind of circle of breath. And then we start playing powerful music. Usually music that's drawn from some of the ethnic traditions, from cultures that are using music to change consciousness.
Kind of training the brain?
Yeah, let's say the different African cultures or some other non-Western cultures developed drumming rhythms that can very powerfully change the brain functioning, induce a trance state. Or we play, you know, Tibetan ritual music or Sufi music. Also some good contemporary music, particularly one that's inspired by these spiritual or ethnic traditions.
Before you continue this, just to interject something, the breath has always been considered a pathway to enlightenment in many ancient cultures, hasn't it?
In many ancient cultures, you see, breath somehow touches on many different levels. I mean, it's the physical level, it's the air that you breathe, then a very important physiological function, you couldn't live without breathing. but it's also connecting then you with the psyche, and through the psyche to the spirit. In many cultures, linguistically, you know, there is a deep connection between breath and spirit. Like if you have terms like pneuma in the Gnostic tradition, means breath, but also the cosmic essence, or prana in the Indian culture, or ki in the Japanese culture, chi in the Chinese culture, ruach in the Hebrew tradition.
And here we are, a culture that barely even breathes in the United States.
True.
So how do you do that? How does this work then as you continue sharing with us about the breath work? Your brain has been entrained to some of the more mystical kinds of music and sound, and then what occurs?
When you go into what I call a holotropic state, which is a certain important subgroup of what we call non-ordinary states, the things that happen to shamans as part of the initiatory crisis, or that they induce in their clients when they are healing them, things that happen in rites of passage of various native cultures, things that were happening to the initiates in the ancient mysteries, the states that are experienced by yogis, by Buddhists, by Taoists, by Sufis, by Christian mystics, by Kabbalists, Hasidic Jews, and so on. So it's
all, by the way, would have been deemed psychotic had they gone to...
Oh, sure, sure. And, you know, it's not would have been. I mean, we have in modern psychiatric literature, actually, a lot of books and articles discussing what would be the best diagnosis. You know, Ramakrishna was a schizophrenic. Saint John of the Cross was hereditary degenerative.
Was Buddhist delusional or Buddha delusional?
Sure, I mean, he had, you know, hallucinations from it. So he would be schizophrenic, or if he, you know, happened to function, he would be called borderline. There is even a paper by Franz Alexander, who's one of the founders of psychosomatic medicine, where meditation is pathologized. And it's a paper called Buddhist Training as Artificial Catatonia. So an unbelievable approach, you know, that pathologizes the whole, not only ritual and spiritual history of humanity, where great religions were started by schizophrenics, but also the cultural history, because, you know, religion played an enormous role in human history. And the idea how experiences of schizophrenics, you know, caused by some kind of unknown brain pathology, could have ultimately led to building of cathedrals, Gothic cathedrals, or Muslim mosques or Hindu temples, and that they would inspire, you know, great composers, great artists.
Yes.
A lot of people relatively normal would give up their personal life and pursue the ideas of Buddha. Or
so basically, we don't want to take a pill for it, that's for sure. So how do we go deeper into it to help work our way through some of our living and breathing everyday issues?
Well, as I mentioned, the breathing and the music induces this non-ordinary state. And once you're in it, that those states function as a kind of inner radar, that things that are in your unconscious that have a sufficient emotional charge, and they're also close enough to the surface that they're available for processing, they start surfacing. And the content of the unconscious starts surfacing into your consciousness and becomes your experience. And the problems, the symptoms get consumed. They are transformed into a stream of experiences.
And this might look nothing like anything you would have ever pegged to be at the root of a problem.
It's usually very different from what you would think about, you know, intellectually, or what a particular school of therapy would tell you that you would, you know, choose for your therapy.
A global search for the truth behind consciousness is becoming apparent everywhere I go. In another of our interviews, the respected science journalist Graham Hancock shares his amazing journey into the Brazilian shamanic world, where he partakes of ayahuasca. Until next time, thanks for watching.